Frederic Murphy, our master of ceremonies, for the introduction, and Jake Cantor, who will be with us for the second half of our presentation this morning to do the Q&A as Frederic indicated. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us this morning. I have and am grateful for the opportunity to be with a diversified, experienced, and cutting-edge group of professionals like yourself to discuss with you about what I think is a significant threat that is becoming more diverse and more complex as each day passes by, and that is the cyber threat. DES 2018 is a special three-day event focusing on how technology has changed the business world forever, and it asks a very serious question, which is whether or not you are ready for the digital avalanche. Business leaders like yourselves who are taking on the challenge of the digital transformation within your respective organizations must successfully implement strategies in a thoughtful and deliberate manner and should contemplate security. We are certainly living in exciting times. However, with these new innovations that have and continue to emerge, whether it is artificial intelligence, machine learning, or new applications for blockchain technology, comes the responsibility of ensuring that the applications are secure, especially when we consider the current cybersecurity environment we are confronted with. If anyone doubts just how serious cybersecurity has become, we can take a look at the first 3 months of 2018 alone. As of April 1, there have been 273 breaches that have taken place and 6 million records that were reported. This is based on numbers that are reported to the FBI. This is for the first 3 months of the year, and it is based only on those cases that come into our organization through the Internet Crime Complaint Center. So I have no doubt that more exist, but the reason we don't know about them is because they're not being reported, and there are many reasons why organizations won't report them. Now, if the first 2 days of April alone are any indication on how the rest of the year is going to go, it's going to be very difficult. On April 1, there was the hack of Hudson's Bay Companies. Hudson's Bay Companies owns stores like Lord & Taylor's, Saks Fifth Avenue, big retailers. There was the theft of data connected to more than 5 million credit and debit cards. On April 2nd, Panera Bread left the information of up to 37 million customers who had created accounts to order food online exposed. Everything related to the customer's full name, email address, physical address, telephone number, and the last 4 digits of either their credit card or debit card was compromised. All of this leads us to conclude that what was comparatively a minor threat 12 years ago, where you have individuals hacking for fun, for bragging rights, just because they could, has evolved, or you can say degenerated, into full-blown nation-state manipulation and multi-million-dollar criminal businesses that are rivaling narcotics trafficking in the revenues they generate. And these threats are coming at us from all sides. Of all the national security priorities, I think it's the cyber threat that has evolved the most in the last 12 years. Think about it. Today, we live our entire lives online. Everything that is important to us lives on the internet, and that's a pretty scary thought. We are very concerned about ransomware, which is a threat that plagues not only the public sector, but the private sector as well. And we are also seeing significant increase in nation-states-sponsored computer intrusions. One of the more recent phenomena is we are seeing something that we are calling the blended threat. That is, nation-states working with criminal contract hackers, sort of like mercenaries, to do their dirty work. And of course, we have significant insider threats that we're concerned about as well. People with natural access to our most sensitive information. Today, I'm sure we have our media partners in the audience, and they cover this area for us, and we are thankful for them. But we know that there's not one day that goes by where you don't pick up a newspaper, open up the front page, and read another article about some kind of cyber event or cyber incident that is taking place. The cyber criminals, they move quickly. They are agile. Unlike law enforcement, they have no laws, rules, or regulations that limit their movement. Back in 1990, nearly 30 years ago, when I started my law enforcement career, When there was a report of a computer crime, we were looking for an individual who actually stole a computer. Or when we heard tweet, we would think of birds singing in the trees. Certainly not somebody who can send a message in a small amount of characters for the entire world to read. Obviously, computer crime today has a whole new meaning, not to mention all the social media platforms that exist. In response, we at the FBI, from a law enforcement perspective, have and continue to adjust our investigative strategies and establish new priorities in both the public and the private sector so we can confront this moving target. The good news is that some of the actions we have been taking is starting to yield real progress. For example, last summer we took down Alphabet, which was the largest marketplace on the dark net. We're talking about literally hundreds of thousands of individuals who were anonymously buying and selling guns, narcotics, engaging in human trafficking, and dealing with stolen identities, and a whole host of other illegal goods and services. In that particular matter, we worked with U.S. law enforcement and our international partners to dismantle that illicit business completely. But one of the things that was notable about that investigation, besides just the scale of it, was the approach that we took. We didn't rush headlong into the investigation. We wanted to be a little bit more strategic about the takedown so that we can ensure the main individuals who were responsible and part of the organization would not be missed. So in that case, we worked in close coordination with our law enforcement partners, and we quietly waited for the right moment. And when that moment came and we struck, what happened was the Alphabet users flocked to another darknet marketplace, and that was called Hansa Market. Essentially, we were there waiting for them, and as they flocked over to that other market, we pushed them into the arms of our Dutch counterparts. So that helped shut that site down as well. And that's important because I think in this space, when we deal with cyber crime, we're dealing a little bit like whack-a-mole, that game where it's over here and you hit it down here, but it pops up over there. So the more successes we can have in this arena, the more successful we're going to be in not just moving the problem around, but solving it as well. Now, we expect that the digital transformation is going to be disruptive, yet beneficial. However, it is important to acknowledge that during these times, security considerations must be considered from the very beginning. My goal today, as Frederic outlined for us earlier, is to briefly discuss a few topics that will provide a general overview of the FBI's approach to cybercrime. We'll take a look at the following three areas: the criminal actors who operate in the cybercrime space. We'll highlight some cybercrime schemes and their impact, and then finally close very briefly with what I believe to be is the proper cybersecurity mindset that we should all observe. So let's start with the threat. In order to address a threat, we need to identify that threat, and then we need to prioritize that threat so that we can allocate our limited resources appropriately and effectively. So how do we see the threat? The cyber threat landscape has and continues to evolve at lightning speed. As we prioritize these threats, we recognize that the order of priority can change at any moment. There are several buckets of actors that we look at. And at the very top, the first bucket we look at are the nation states. Now, with regard to nation states, we still see traditional espionage, but today we see a significant increase in economic espionage as well. We also see recognition from some states that cyber operations can be a relatively cheap and deniable means to a worrisome end. That is to target entire populations and governments in online influence operations designed to shape perceptions. Cyber is a vector, and some of the nation states have realized that this vector can be used as a capability to weaponize the information that has been stolen as a result of hacks. The goal of such influence operations is to erode the population's confidence, not only in its institutions, but in its values, its leaders, and most importantly, in its ability to find the truth. And the long-term objective is to undermine the target by magnifying any number of existing issues that currently divide the people. and all in an effort to create discord and aggravate tensions. These influence operations are not new, but there is an observed increase in their scalability due to the modern information environment and social media. Influence operations can include disinformation propaganda and targeted disclosure of hacked materials. We believe that the best way to combat this serious problem is through as much transparency and exposure as possible. We have to make the targeted audiences less vulnerable by educating them about the threat and providing context to enable critical judgment to and by the public. One recent example of this activity is the indictment by the U.S. Special Counsel's Office of the 13 Russians that were affiliated with the Internet Research Agency, or the so-called St. Petersburg Troll Farm. And for those of you who are interested in this, I would encourage you to take a look at that indictment, which is publicly available on the internet, so you can see how it's laid out, methodical approach that they took to divide, demoralize, and push us further apart with these influence operations. These are some of the threats from nation states that are seeking our ideas and innovation. Threats not just from the intelligence operatives of old, but spies that are posing as business leaders, scientists, and even students. Of the nation-state actors that are out there engaged in this activity, Russia remains the most sophisticated and technically capable. They are really good at hiding the digital breadcrumbs that lead back to them. I mentioned earlier the blended threat, where you have intelligence operatives and mercenaries working together. Let's take a look at the Yahoo hack. In August of 2017, as most of you know, Yahoo reported the hack where something like 500 million users' information was taken. In that case, they were targeting journalists, government officials, financial sector employees, and anyone else who had an account. When we, in the FBI, did our investigation and reached the point of indictment, we indicted 2 Russian Federal Security Service officers who were working in concert with 2 well-known Russian criminal hackers. That's the blended threat that I was talking about earlier. You have the intelligence operatives, and then you have the mercenaries working together. And I think we're seeing more of that, not just with Russia, but with other countries as well. China is another one of those nation states that is engaged in state-sponsored computer intrusions. However, in the last few years, we have seen China change their approach. China used to be loud in and around your network, almost like the drunk burglar who was banging on your door and breaking windows trying to get in. This approach, though, changed. As a result of the 2014 indictment against 5 Chinese army officers, the Chinese have changed their tactics. Today, they operate in a more patient and methodical manner, akin to death by 1,000 cuts. And let's take a quick look at the case of Lockheed Martin. Here's an example where China is engaging in a state-sponsored computer intrusion for the purpose of gaining a military advantage. In this example, the corporate trade secrets of Lockheed Martin was targeted. Byzantine Hades was the name of the malware that was used by the Chinese army officers to steal data related to the B-2 stealth bomber, the F-22 fighter jet, and the F-35 fighter jet, all for purposes of increasing the capability of their military fighter jet program. Access to the Department of Defense systems was made through clear defense contractors or their third-party vendors, and the impact in terms of an economic impact was estimated to be somewhere in the range of $100 million US. A very significant matter. Another nation state which is active in this area is Iran. Now, Iran is an interesting case. With regard to Iran, we have seen a noticeable uptick in activity and sophistication of their cyber attacks. In fact, in November of last year, in the Southern District of New York, the FBI unsealed an indictment that was investigated out of my office against an individual by the name of Behzad Mesri for his alleged role in unleashing a cyber attack and extortion campaign against HBO, the media company, in an attempt to shake them down worth of $6 million worth of Bitcoins. You may remember this case because the subject, Mesri, had threatened to release the unplayed episodes of Games of Thrones. So whether it focuses on influence operations or the theft of intellectual property, When dealing with nation states, our overall goal is to diminish this threat and send messages that could possibly change behavior. We're trying to impose costs wherever we can. So while an individual indicted for a cybercrime may not necessarily appear immediately in a U.S. courtroom, things like their ability to freely move from country to country changes. As we said earlier in the Yahoo example where the blended threat was highlighted, the cyber criminals will now have to think a little bit more closely and carefully about whether or not they want to pursue a legitimate job opportunity outside of their country, maybe advance their education, or simply take a vacation. The reason is because these criminals who have been indicted and charged now become fugitives from the law, and the FBI works with all of our international partners to bring such criminals to justice. And one great example of this point is the case involving the NeverQuest malware. This malware was designed to steal online banking credentials and which in fact affected many people and institutions globally. This particular investigation was also run out of my office and where we focused on identifying the major operator behind this attack. Based on this investigation conducted by my agents, in August 5 of 2016, Russian national Stanislav Lisov was charged by the prosecutors in the subject district of New York and an arrest warrant was issued. 6 months later, in January of 2017, we received information that Lisov had traveled from Russia to Spain. The investigative team worked immediately directly with our legal attaché, who is the FBI's #1 representative in country, and worked also directly with the Spanish Guardia Civil Police Force to coordinate the location and effecting the arrest of Lisov. On January 13, 2017, while attempting to return his rental vehicle, Lisov was arrested by the Spanish authorities based on the arrest warrant issued in the United States. And the Spanish judge in that matter ordered Lisov to be detained pending extradition. After several months passed, where Lisov fought extradition on August 1, 2017, the Spanish court ruled that Lisov would indeed be extradited to the United States. On January 18 of 2018, very early part of this year, Russian national Lisov was successfully extradited to the United States where my agents were waiting for him and picked him up. It took approximately 1.5 years from the time Lisov was charged until the time he was brought to appear in the U.S. courtroom to face the charges. But the point is that these types of successes should cause all criminals to pause and consider what the outcome would be, which is fairly easy to understand when consideration is given to the fact that law enforcement is united in its effort around the world to track down and combat all crimes, including cybercrime. So these are some of the nation-state actors. There are others, but we see these as the most proficient. Remember, we said that there are many buckets out there, several buckets that we look at from the FBI perspective, and these nation-states are only just the top bucket. Continuing with the threat landscape we look at the insider threat, which focuses on those individuals who have natural access to our most sensitive information. So despite layering our defenses and building high walls around our networks, many times the threat comes from within. And in this type of attack, there's two types. You may have an intentional insider. Maybe it is a disgruntled employee who knows that they're about to be dismissed from their job, and they have access and write a script on the payroll system that says, if you take my name and is removed from the payroll system, remove everybody's name. Think of what that would cost to an organization when they can't pay their employees. Or more simply, this disgruntled employee steals some sensitive information, maybe intellectual property, and sells it to a competitor. The other part of it is maybe the unintentional insider. Now this person is an employee who maybe becomes lax with security protocols in favor of productivity. So their heart's in the right place, but the end result is the same. Or maybe the employee loses an electronic device which was not properly configured to ensure that the information on the device was secure. Just as concerning may be that these employees lack a cybersecurity mindset and can fall very easily to a targeted phishing campaign. The insider threat is also a very significant threat that deserves consideration, especially when you stop and think that the insider can be responsible for sabotaging or destruction of your network or information. the theft of intellectual property or trade secrets, engaging in economic espionage, or maybe just internal fraud. In discussing the insider threat, it's very important to keep in mind that the insider not only includes the employees you have on board, but it includes also your trusted business partners, those third-party vendors that you allow access to. It includes anyone, ultimately, who has authorized access to either your physical space or your electronic space. Next, we have multinational criminal syndicates, those who are interested in stealing your information and making money by selling the sensitive information to the highest bidder, the way criminals have always done it. The purveyors of ransomware next on the list. Ransomware, which we know is a type of malware which encrypts your information into an unreadable format until you pay a ransom. Now, we have seen nation states and criminal syndicates alike engaged in ransomware, but we keep them in their own category because it has become a very specific focus in a criminal enterprise that they engage only in the ransomware. And the reason is become a successful business model that generates a lot of money, and we'll talk a little bit more about ransomware later on. The purveyors of ransomware are followed by hacktivists. Now, hacktivists are a motley crew of people with all manner of motivations: political, philosophical, personal. It's not about the money for these people, but more about, in their minds, sending a message. Finally, we look at the cyber terrorist. Now, we are certainly seeing a significant increase in the complexity of the national security threats. On the counterterrorism side, while we still confront large structured organizations like Al-Qaeda, who are seeking to cause mass casualty attacks that nobody in this room needs to be reminded about, while that is still very much a part of today's counterterrorism landscape, we are also dealing with groups like ISIS, where the method of operation for them is decidedly different. They're using technology in a much more advanced way. They're using social media to recruit, radicalize, and direct their people worldwide. And that worries us a lot because we are now seeing terrorists who will use crude but agile methods of attack. Attacks that can be planned more efficiently, with fewer participants, and executed in a much shorter period of time. The concern is that the cyber terrorist one day will be able to simultaneously execute an attack in the virtual world and in the physical world. For example, a cyber terrorist who is able to take control of a command and control system of an office building, eliminating the elevators, the communication apparatus, and maybe even the fire suppression system. Shut down all communication for the building. And then simultaneously send in the terrorist group who will now start taking hostages and killing indiscriminately. Ladies and gentlemen, the truth is that such a scenario is only limited by your imagination. So as you can tell, there are no shortage of issues we are concerned with, and going through this process of prioritizing and allocating the resources appropriately, we feel is the best approach in dealing with this threat. So now we've outlined the threat actors. Let's take a brief look at a couple of cyber criminal schemes and their impact. Last year in 2017, it took an average of 206 days for organizations to detect an intrusion and 55 days to contain it. The average total cost of a data breach was nearly $7.5 million, and that's, again, statistics reported in the United States. So forgive me for stating the obvious, but cybersecurity continues to be a huge economic risk for organizations. The first scheme we'll take a look at is the business email compromise, or what is known as the BEC. The business email compromise is a sophisticated scam targeting businesses that regularly conduct wire transfer payments, which is almost every company in the world today. The scam is carried out by compromising legitimate email accounts through social engineering or computer intrusion techniques, the purpose of which is to ultimately conduct unauthorized transfer of funds. A recent report from a private sector cybersecurity firm identified malicious PDFs targeting every major industry, financial sector, retailers, even religious organizations. And there are many different criminal groups that are engaged in this activity. However, recent investigative analysis of the artifacts that were left in the PDFs revealed that these compromises, the source of the compromise, a community of West African cyber criminals were behind them. On average, as the report alleges, the group steals $2.7 million from companies and $422,000 from individuals. Again, US-based numbers. In one case investigated by my team recently out of the New York office, a BEC scam was reported by a financial services company in New York City. In that case, the company received an email they believed to be from their client, which was authorizing a transfer of $200,000. The email itself contained formatting and documents which genuinely replicated the formatted documents of the client. In short, the cyber actors had penetrated the email system of the client using spear phishing, which allowed the criminals to generate and continue their further reconnaissance of the network. And this reconnaissance provided greater insight into the vendor-client relationship, which allowed the criminals to ultimately draft this believable email. The transfer of funds took place, fortunately. In this case, we worked with the victim and received the initial email addresses, which turned out to be nothing more than fake email addresses that were set up to do the fraud. We followed that investigative step with analysis of IP addresses as well as cookies, and conducted over 50 search warrants that were authorized by the courts. Ultimately, we were able to tie the email addresses to the perpetrators behind this attack. We identified 20 Nigerian subjects that were part of a semi-organized group, and a conservative review of the information that we received indicated that this group was responsible for a loss of nearly $30 million with thousands of victims in their path. 8 subjects of this criminal group was indicted. 2 of them, like Lisov, have been extradited back to the United States. 6 remain out in the open, but I am confident that our agents, working with our international partners, will be able to locate them and have them extradited back to the United States to face charges as well. Now, even though the larger BEC group of actors are considered the lowest skilled technically, they have been responsible for the theft of more than $5 billion in fraud in the last 3 years. And once again, those are numbers that are being reported to the FBI. So I believe that the business email compromise will remain a pervasive threat due to its low barrier of entry, and the maturing social engineering techniques, and cyber criminals almost certainly will continue to use this BEC scan to target industries indiscriminately, but certainly financial sectors. Let's take a brief look at another scam, and that you've all heard of, and that's ransomware. Now, we know ransomware is a type of malware that is installed on a computer that encrypts files, making them inaccessible until you pay the ransom. Ransomware is typically installed when you open up an email attachment that drops the malware, click on a malicious link, or maybe you go by a compromised website and what's known as a drive-by download, where you don't have to do anything other than visit a website that's been compromised. Here's another scheme which has proven to be profitable for the criminal actors, which keeps them motivated to develop their trade and hone their skills. Infections from ransomware, such as Petya and WannaCry, which was recently attributed to North Korea, have been increasing significantly over the last 3 years. The number of emails just from 2016 to 2017 alone infected by ransomware increased by 6,000%. In 2017, ransomware types tripled. 11% more users reported encountering ransomware, and email phishing was the #1 ransomware vehicle, and the US was the #1 target. These statistics speak greatly to the growing severity of the problem faced by government, industry, and academia. The Petya and the WannaCry ransomware attacks were the most proficient in 2017. If we go back to 2016 and consider the first 3 months alone, the victims of ransomware paid $200 million in the first 3 months of 2016 to their attackers. The payments were made mostly in Bitcoin, which is the cryptocurrency of choice for the ransomware attackers, and even law enforcement is not immune. More than 13 law enforcement agencies in 7 different states in the United States fell victim to ransomware. Here's an example. In 2016, the San Francisco MTA system fell victim to a ransomware attack which resulted in the shutdown of the fare kiosks and the fare gates, allowing the customers to ride for free for 24 hours. If this same attack were to hit the Madrid metro system, which has the 7th longest metro system in the world, 293 kilometers, does about 585 million trips per year, nearly $1 billion in revenue annually. If this were to happen and take down the metro system here in Madrid, that would result in the loss of 3 million euros. That's only for one day. That's a huge economic impact for any municipality, any city, and so it's a serious issue. So as we can see, the ransomware attacks are resulting in serious disruptions and financial loss. Now there's always the issue of whether or not to pay the ransom. The FBI's position is that the ransom should not be paid. And the reasons are paying the ransom does not guarantee that you're going to get the decryption keys necessary to release the information. And we've seen that happen. Secondly, paying the ransom emboldens the criminal to continue their illegal activity. If these people are paying, these guys are going to pay. And so it becomes a profitable business model for them to continue to engage in. And then finally, paying the ransom provides the criminals with additional funds to continue their illegal businesses, which may also include the funding of terrorist organizations. Now that being said, even though the FBI does not advocate for the payment of the ransom, we recognize that when business leaders like yourselves are faced with the issues of business continuity, that you're going to have a discussion, and we hope that that discussion is an honest and thorough and elaborate discussion that takes into consideration not only your business, but your customers and your employees as well. We hope, though, that this discussion leads to a rational decision. So we've covered the threat landscape, we've covered the criminal schemes and their impact, we've talked about the business email compromise, and we've talked about ransomware. And so just for the last 2 minutes, I'd like to close and briefly touch on what I believe is the proper cybersecurity mindset we should have that, if adopted, will increase our overall security posture. Based on our discussion, I believe it is reasonable to conclude that having a proper security mindset becomes a critical component relating to how you and your organizations approach the digital transformation that is taking place. Security, and specifically cybersecurity, should be an area of the business enterprise that is constantly being evaluated. It should be considered from the very beginning of any process, whether that is setting up a network, building a software application, or looking at and evaluating the life cycle of the supply chain life cycle. Security should be baked in from the very beginning. In this respect, security becomes more than just a cost code. And we can look at it as a value proposition. And so when we consider the value proposition, we know that value is a function of risk and return. The risk is equivalent to the threat that exists out in the wild and the vulnerability that exists inside your organizations. And we also need to think, if the threat and the vulnerability meet, what is going to be the impact to the organization? The value that is realized from taking this methodical approach to a risk-based analysis should be ultimately reflected in a positive fashion for corporations in earnings per share, or for individuals or even investors, their return on investment. The bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is when dealing with any security, but in particular cybersecurity, the riskiest risk is one of inaction. That is why security should be viewed for what it could be, and that is to become a business enabler and make you more proficient, more advanced, and quicker at moving your business forward. With that, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I look forward to continuing our conversation with Jay Cantor of Business Insider.
My name is Jay Cantor. I'm the Executive Editor at Business Insider in London. Ari, thank you. That was a fascinating and very informative speech. You covered a lot of ground. We'll have time for questions from the audience, but I'm going to get the ball rolling. It's not every day you get to speak to an FBI agent. I just wondered if you could give us a bit of a sense of what an average day is for you.
An average day for me is a long day. It starts very early and typically ends very late for me.
These criminals don't go to sleep, no?
No, they don't go to sleep, which keeps me up at night as well. But in addition to the cyber investigative branch of the FBI's New York office, I also run our technology branch and also our surveillance operations. And the technology branch, if I could just take a minute to explain it, typically involves supporting the entire technical infrastructure that allows all the employees inside of our New York office to communicate not only with each other, but also with the rest of the FBI connected globally. And then we also run these operations, the surveillance operations out of my division as well. And that includes surveillance operations to support all the ongoing investigations, whether they're national security or criminal. And then the cyber branch is the one that focuses on cybersecurity and cyber-based investigations. And here's where I spend a lot of time on a daily basis engaging in an external liaison effort to establish relationships not only with my law enforcement partners, but also with the private sector, where the engagement in the event of a cyber intrusion is going to be more pronounced.
Of all the threats that you discussed, what takes up the majority of your time?
All of them. So I'm very concerned about all the threats that we do, but of course we have to prioritize that as well. And so whether it's a nation state who is maybe meddling around on the infrastructure of a particular company, critical infrastructure, let's say the energy sector or the telecommunications sector, that's always very concerning to me. Or maybe it's the cyber terrorist, or even a criminal. It doesn't have to be a cyber terrorist, but somebody who takes down the emergency response services system, and maybe the communications as well. In large, densely populated cities like Madrid, London, New York City, when you eliminate the ability to communicate with law enforcement or the fire department or the medical technicians, and you take away their ability, let's say, to pull out money from the ATM machine, and now you can't speak on the phone either, that can literally create havoc for a city. So those are the things that keep me up.
Let's just talk about the nation states briefly. I mean, you laid out some of the main actors: Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. Do they provide different kinds of threats to the US?
So first I would start off by saying these nation-state actors that I've outlined and identified for everyone this morning, who are the most proficient, there are others out there as well. I would also say they're not targeting just the United States. Everybody is fair game. Many times the nation-states are targeting other countries because there's targets of opportunity. Maybe they've seen a particular vulnerability that they can exploit, and so they take advantage of doing that. Sometimes they do it with a specific focus, and they're going to stay steady on that objective until they achieve it. But what they do is generally the same. I don't think that any one particular nation state brings any one specific threat. I think any threat that they can, any cyber-related threat that they can bring to bear to achieve whatever their objective is going to be the one they pursue.
And do those threats continue regardless of the health of diplomatic relations between the countries?
So I think they do, and I think it's a strategy that's taken on from a policy perspective from these governments. I don't know that diplomacy is really going to impact their ability or desire to continue to engage in this activity, because essentially what they're looking for is information, they're looking for access, and they're looking for advantage. And so whether it is in the cyber universe or not, those are the objectives that they're going to do. Now what's interesting is, again, despite the state of diplomacy, I believe it's going to continue. And the reason is, today they don't have to do it the way they used to do it, which is put an actual intelligence officer on the ground to walk around and either engage somebody, develop a relationship who has access to the information you're looking for, or to engage with some other entity to push their objective. They can do this from a distance where it's more cost effective and you have a greater sense or ability for some anonymity.
So even between the UK and the US, we have a very famous special relationship. There is still a risk from British cyber criminals in America. Would that be fair?
So I think there is a risk of anyone being a victim of a cyber attack from any cyber criminal, whether they are based in the UK or in the US. We have our own cyber criminals that are engaged in this, folks. I'm not sitting here saying everybody else is involved and we're not. That's what keeps me busy and the rest of the FBI. So yes, I think anybody can be considered a target of any criminal acting in any capacity, regardless of location. And that's the one thing about cybercrime, right? It recognizes no hard physical borders. That's what is so enticing about the cyber criminal who wants to engage in this. And then the return on investment for them is also very sweet, because they can be limited in their expenditure, yet the return, the monies and revenues that can be generated are enormous.
I'll come to the audience in a second, but just quickly, how do you keep on top of the technological progressions that they're making, the increasingly sophisticated ways that they're trying to attack America?
So some of the things that we do is come to conferences like this where we can see what the latest and greatest is out there in terms of the technology. Now we have certain groups that are following the technology in the commercial markets to keep ourselves informed. One of the key ways, though, that we stay on top of this has to do with collaboration. Collaboration in several respects. Not only with the private sector, who tend to be the targets and the victims of these cyber attacks, but also with our law enforcement and intelligence partners globally. Not only in the United States, but globally as well. We like to get together and collaborate to sort of share each other's notes and discuss what we are seeing to try to develop emerging trends and where the next threat is going to come from. So it's a collaborative effort. And we also do these public-private relationships as well. So back home, the FBI works with the NCFTA, which stands for the National Cyber Forensic Training Alliance, which is a conglomeration of academia, subject matter experts, and law enforcement that are engaged, housed under one roof, if you will, like a task force environment, where we have the private sector employees, intelligence personnel there as well, and so they work in unison with each other. And so we use that to try to establish what the emerging trends are, what these different variants look like, how we can solve those issues.
So you're working with counterparts here in Europe?
Absolutely. So the example that we spoke about earlier with regard to the extradition of Lisov would not be possible if not for the.
It's just here on your lapel.
There you go. So, folks, I'm sweating here. You figure somebody without hair would sweat. The lights. So yeah, we work with our European law enforcement partners because successes like the Lisov extradition from Spain back to the United States would not be possible. But they also bring more than just that, because they too have access to resources. They've developed relationships with the private sector here in country, and uniquely we will have an opportunity and a need to engage with them. And so we do so, again, through our legal attaché, who is present with us here today, whose primary objective and the director of the FBI's personal representative here in country to engage not only with our law enforcement partners, but also with the private sector.
Okay. Would anyone like to ask Ari a question? There's a gentleman in the front row here. If you could just say your name and where you work, that would be appreciated.
Hello, my name is Carlos Costa. I'm a lecturer at ICENT, which is a business school here in Madrid. My question is, and I'm being focused on social media activists, but it's not the point here. My question is about Prime Minister Theresa May, that mentioned that there is a weaponization of information. You mentioned this too. But she was referring to high-tech companies, social media companies. In the face of the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, what is your opinion, and the fact that the high-tech companies usually tend to say that they are not accountable for the content that is spread by their platforms. So have you seen any kind of change in their attitudes about their responsibility in this process?
So I'm almost inclined to defer that question to my British colleague since we talked about a statement made by Prime Minister May. But no, I think that's a
nice easy question for you.
That's a very easy question. No, I think though. I understand that. I understand that. It's a very good question. I think it's one that's also very relevant. And so part of the issue is the need to balance the service that they are providing with First Amendment rights of freedom of free speech. And so that privacy issue that's associated with the information we give up to these social media platforms knowingly, versus the security that might be associated with some of the content that is revealed, is a fine balance. And I think it's one that requires discussion of all the stakeholders to find out what that sweet spot is. And I don't know that it's ever achieved because it's constantly moving and there's constantly new events that are taking place. From my perspective, though, as an investigator, I see positive efforts from the types of Facebook and Twitter in terms of trying to monitor the activity and satisfy that fine balance between, again, the freedom of speech versus security. I don't know that we're quite there, but I don't know that we'll ever be there. There's always room for improvement. But when I'm involved in an official investigation, asking for assistance, I'm happy where we are. And again, and I say that knowing that we can all be better at what we do, but I think I see some good movement.
So you feel you have transparency from the likes of Facebook and Twitter where it's needed?
I will never know truly if I have 100% transparency because I'm not on the inside. I know though that they are responsive, and sometimes they're not, and we can have and discuss the issue of what happened in San Bernardino with Apple, right? Let's not put our heads in the sand. That was a discussion that takes place. I think one of the benefits of what happened there was that this issue was highlighted for the stakeholders, whether it's the legislator in the United States who are passing the laws and the private companies who have an obligation and a fiduciary duty not only to their customers, right, and their shareholders, but also to the public writ large because they're providing a big social platform for communication. And so with that comes the responsibility to figure out what is that right balance between privacy and security. So again, I think this is a good discussion and one that needs to continue by the policymakers.
In terms of the influencing campaign specifically, I mean, we've seen Facebook, they are rolling out transparency across Europe. There's a big referendum in Ireland about abortion, and they are making political advertising transparent. So users of Facebook know when perhaps a foreign entity is meddling or involved in advertising, trying to swing a vote one way or another. Do you think measures like that, those transparency measures, are important to preventing future influencing campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very critical that the user of a platform, the consumer of the information that's being projected on a platform, is aware of the source of that information. One of the difficulties we are going to be confronted in is something similar to what the Internet Research Agency did, the St. Petersburg Troll, which is they engaged in creating false identities, creating false companies, using cutouts to pay for the services, right? So are you really, even though the transparency exists, do we really know who is behind the source of the information? And that's something that we are going to have to work through, not only from the corporate perspective, but certainly from the government perspective in the investigation. And it goes back to the comments I made a little bit earlier, where it becomes incumbent upon us, all of us together, to educate and get to a point of transparency so that people who are consuming the information have at least the best available information to make a logical decision.
Just on the Russian example specifically, have you ever seen interference on that scale in American politics?
So, the influence operations is something that has been going on for a long time. There's nothing new about this. I think what's new about it is the scalability of it because of the information we are in and social media being able to project those messages far and wide at a very fast clip. Years of old, you had to have those intelligence operatives get on the ground, create or find a group that was in line with what their objective was, which is typically not in line with the democratically elected objective. And so it would take a process and meetings, but they were always at risk of being identified. Here, when they engage in these operations from a distance and have the ability to push the information again on social media in a flash to millions of people worldwide, I think that's where the change is.
So it's both the anonymity and the scale. That's what's changed.
I think that's right. Those have always been the objective, but I think the ability to execute that plan more effectively has changed.
But that is made possible by the scale of the social media companies themselves.
By technology writ large.
Okay. Would anyone else like to ask questions? A lady just up here. There's a mic coming here from the left.
Hello, Tina Robles from Kid Qualitas, Customer Experience Consulting Group. I want just to answer from you. Which recommendations can you give to young employers and students to not to be caught by cyber criminals?
So if I understood the question correctly, is some of the best practices so that you don't become a victim. Is that right? So there's nothing new with what I'm about to tell you. You've all heard this before, but I think one of the problems is for one reason or another, we tend not to execute on all of this. And it's applicable not only to the individual, but to the corporations. And before I get into those best practices, I'll make a comment on social media, because I think when we're talking about young adults, whether they're in high school or in college, I think it's important to recognize, first of all, what you are allowing, what you are giving up to these social media platforms. And we saw that with the recent events of Facebook. You're signing this in the terms of agreement. Understand that. If you come to the conclusion that you're okay with giving up the information they're telling you that you're going to give up, then the minimum you should be doing is setting all the security features to the maximum. And so when I have the opportunity to discuss this topic with parents of younger kids who have access to Instagram or Facebook, I said, listen, there's no reason why a 10-year-old child should have 1,000 friends. I don't have 1,000 friends, right? They're just liking everybody. But when you start liking everybody and you develop that network, it's not just 1,000 friends, it's 1,000 friends multiplied. It's like a spider web. The further out you get, the more bigger it becomes. So especially for parents and their children, public service announcement for the day, take a look at that social media and make sure that the security settings are set to the highest standard. Now, with regard to keeping yourself secure generally, basic steps we should all be taking. Number one, make sure you're running on the latest operating system that is available for your device. Make sure that you are engaging in patch management for corporations, and for individuals, update your applications when the new updates become available, right? Because they are typically fixing bug fixes, right? Security fixes is what they're addressing, certain processing and processing power as well. The third thing we can do, make sure you're running the latest antivirus, right? Because we know that the way the antivirus works is known signatures of known malware, but that's constantly being updated. So unless you're on the latest antivirus, something that may have been caught by an antivirus may get through because you haven't updated your antivirus. Specifically dealing with the ransomware issue, backups is the key. If you have a good backup from a known good source, then you won't be worried about being a victim of ransomware. It's going to be problematic for you, it's going to disrupt you, delay you, interrupt your business, but a good backup can be the difference between being down for a few hours or being down for a few weeks. And for business people, that's a serious issue. And then finally, we should be engaging in good computer hygiene. What do I mean by that? Don't click on email attachments or links that are sent to you from people you don't know. And I tell you, you may think it's funny, but cats don't sing. So when somebody says, look at this picture of a cat singing, don't click on it. And I use that as an example because that's been used as a vector of compromise for a lot of people.
It's a phishing hook.
It's a phishing hook, so, exactly. So don't engage, let's engage in good computer hygiene. And for the corporations, for the business leaders out there, it's an issue of, it's just as much an issue of a modification in human behavior as it is in the implementation of technical solutions, right? Because that alone is not going to solve your problem.
Is there a common mistake you see people and businesses make in terms of putting up their barriers and making sure they're protecting themselves?
So I think it's difficult for businesses, especially let's say when we talk about patch management, right? Because it sounds simple, but it's not. When you're using hundreds of different software applications to do your business on a daily basis, it's hard to really test it. When you're going to test it, the time of the event, make sure it doesn't disrupt ongoing operation. I don't think there's a common mistake that we can say is a denominator across all sectors, but everyone has to be concerned about it. The energy sector is concerned about their ICS systems, right? The industrial control systems, where they're using different applications than a company that's in a closed area, closed environment.
And it goes back to what you said in your speech, that investing in this is an important part of the business now. It's, you know,
correct. Investing not only in technical solutions, but certainly in your people as well. There's a lot of statistics and reports out there that indicate somewhere of up to 80 or even greater, 80% or greater of the attacks that are successful are as a result of human interaction. So training and education of your employees is also a critical component.
Okay, thank you. Another question. There's a gentleman here.
Good morning. My name is Angel from Amadeus, a travel technology company. And my question is related to cryptocurrencies. I would assume they have made your job more difficult because it's more difficult to follow the money. So I just want to check if that's true, and then how are you adapting to that?
So cryptocurrencies, are they making your job more difficult, harder to follow the money?
So cryptocurrencies are hard to track back to the original source. But it's not impossible, and we do that. Remember what blockchain is. Just the technology. It is a transparent ledger, transparent distributed ledger. The distributed piece of it makes it difficult to track it back. It takes a lot of time, consumes a lot of energy, but it's doable. So the idea of pure anonymity associated with the cryptocurrency wallet is sort of not accurate. It's a difficult task, but you're capable of doing it. Does it make my investigations difficult? To the extent that a cryptocurrency wallet and the monies associated with our wallet are evidence of a case, and I want that evidence, right? Because remember, as an investigator, my objective is to find the bad guy, work with the courts, get an arrest warrant, have them arrested, and then eventually go to court for prosecution. For that prosecution, I need evidence. So it may be a circumstance where it is that Bitcoin wallet identified back to its original source and the contents thereof, that is that critical piece of evidence. And so if my case relies on that solely, which it typically does not, but if it relies on that piece of evidence to prove my case, that's where it makes it more difficult. But I don't think it changes much of the dynamic of any investigation.
Is it typically the currency of choice now? When
Bitcoin has been,
particularly with ransomware, is that the case?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So I think Bitcoin has and continues to be the cryptocurrency of choice, not only for criminal actors, but I think for those who are speculating and are involved in cryptocurrencies as well.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? I'll keep coming to people in the front row. If you're at the back and you have a question, please put your hand up. I will come to you. But there's a gentleman right here in the front row as well.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for the speech. My name is Rodrigo Sadesa. I work for a Spanish startup working on blockchain. My question is, in order to understand the mindset of the cyber threats, do you hire like hackers or cyber criminals just to understand the future opportunities that these threats will have? Or just hire like legal people with the higher technology knowledge?
So inside the FBI, we have special agents who are experts in the area of information technology, cybersecurity, and the like. So the answer is I don't hire hackers, I arrest hackers. Now, we know that there are ethical hackers out there that do penetration testing, but they're hired and they're declared to the company that they're going to work for, and they have all the paperwork and the legal documents necessary for them to do that. And so we recognize that that exists. There may be circumstances, and I know many of them, where I have a discussion with them to sort of educate me, make me better, if you will, at what I'm doing to stay current on the latest trends. But inside the FBI, we have special agent investigators who are experts in this area. We have data scientists, we have data operations specialists, so we have a good team, core group of individuals that help us to conduct these investigations. But yeah, when we have the opportunity, those who are experts in their area, we will engage with them to get ideas and to get a better understanding.
Okay, I think we are pretty much out of time. I just had one final question before we say goodbye. The British Chancellor, former British Chancellor in the UK, said this week, told us in fact at Business Insider, that the next big financial crisis will be caused by a cyber attack. Is that something you agree with, or do you think that the banks are reasonably well protected?
So I think anything is possible. So I can't preclude that as a possibility. However, based on my experience in dealing with many different banks in the financial sector in New York City, I can say that because they've been dealing with this issue for a long, long time, they are probably the most advanced as it relates to cybersecurity. So though it's possible, can't discount that as a problem, as a possible event. I'm fairly comfortable knowing what I know with regard to the financial sector and where they are, especially as it relates to the major financial sectors that are responsible for moving the majority of the world's currencies.
We've been given a bit more time.
I guess, I'm happy to stay as long as they let me.
A slightly less serious question, but nonetheless important, I feel. Do you think that Hollywood films and TV, do they glamorize cybercrime? And does that make your job harder?
Hollywood's in the business of entertaining, so I suppose they're supposed to glamorize cybercrime. I'm not sure that the different shows that are out there, which by the way I don't watch.
There's nothing you don't watch?
No, not really. I don't really have time. Remember, I start early and end late. But I don't think that, however it's portrayed on TV, that really impacts the mission of the FBI or law enforcement globally in how it deals with or addresses the issue of cybersecurity.
And do you have a favorite part of the job? Is there one element that gives you the most satisfaction?
So, one area that really provides me great satisfaction in my position is to do exactly what I'm doing here today, to have the opportunity to spend time with the people that I'm most concerned about, which is the public, and let them know what it is that the FBI is doing in this space, because a lot of times that's a question, and sort of have the opportunity also to personalize that relationship. Listen, I'm a big believer in collaboration, but one of the key elements in being successful in collaborating with people is to get out there and actually physically touch them, speak with them, see them, have a cup of coffee together. It's really important to have a cup of coffee on a sunny day rather than when the clouds roll in and it rains, because then it's going to be too late for you and I to establish that relationship. Because to be successful, it has to be based on trust. And that's what I've learned over the years. And so having this opportunity to be here with the people, or what I do back home, and we spoke about this earlier, to go out there and establish these relationships with the people that I'm going to be working with, that's what I find most satisfying. Hearing from them what they're concerned about, and then letting them know what it is we are doing as the FBI to help them and alleviate some of those concerns.
Okay, and finally, what are the key ingredients that make a successful agent in your division?
Somebody who is motivated, dedicated to the mission, motivated to do the work, which is the right thing for the people, and then somebody who's always willing to learn. Because in this area, where it's constantly changing, you can be an expert in one specific focus area, but that expertise is going to go to the wayside because that has now morphed into something new, which is why it's very essential to be motivated, dedicated to the mission, and willing to constantly learn.
Okay. Our time has gone back up again. I wonder if there's a problem with the clock, but...
I don't know. Can we check with the clock?
Can we carry on?
All right, folks.
Is there any other questions?
I guess this is really good. They're giving us more time.
There's a gentleman right here.
Hi, this is Ignacio from my city home and property management company. We've been talking about protecting ourselves and what the terrorists and bad nations are doing. What are Europe and US doing on a more aggressive view towards those nations? Are we preparing ourselves, our abilities to attack those nations?
So are we, European countries in the United States, increasing our capability to attack back? There's no doubt in my mind that we have that capability, because it would be foolish for us not to have that capability, considering that is the very thing that we are confronted with. That being said, I can tell you that the FBI does not engage in offensive operations. We don't have the authorities to do that. And so we conduct our investigations typically and unfortunately after the fact. We're very reactive. But we're not just reactive. We also try to establish ourselves a methodology that allows us to be not only preventive, which is talk about some of the security measures that we can take, but also predictive. And so for that we use intelligence to help us identify who the next threat actor is, where it's coming from, and what the objective is. And that's where we engage with not only agencies within the United States intelligence community, but globally as well with our foreign partners, intelligence and law enforcement. And it may be the results of these investigations that are informing the policymakers as to whether or not offensive operations should take place.
Okay. Many thanks for your time, Ari. Ladies and gentlemen, Ari Mahairas.